in the multilateral lending banks, the MLDBs, we saw more and more Asians, Indians moving in who were young, who would have a string of freshly acquired degrees and diplomas and certifications, all gained from either American or European universities and schools, into the lower ranks of these MLDB, these multilateral development banks. And then within a matter of 2 to 3 years, they would be in positions where they were assisting the drafting of the bank's country lending strategies. I think that whole process to me was a very big red signal. Look, what on earth is going on here? The very many groups who have been critical of what is called global finance and the global financialization of so many things that are now financialized, not just commodities, whether they have paid enough attention to this or whether they were persuaded not to. Indeed, I used to know some of them, like Eurodad, the European Foundation on Debt and Development. What was his name? He was a Parsi mystery. They were very competent with theories, with frameworks, and with lending strategies, effectiveness, reporting, and so on and so forth. Yes, but what about those who were in fact sitting in those chairs as country assistants, development team assistants, project supervisors, and these projects were, $500 million and above. How could a 35-year-old who had completed a PhD just 3 or 4 years earlier decide on behalf of an entire country, even if it was a small country like Laos or Cambodia, that this is what was needed? I couldn't make any sense of it. I expected others to, but I didn't find enough. Perhaps I didn't look, of course, I was saying, we get wrapped up into so many things, we can't look everywhere at the same time. But there certainly didn't seem to be enough evidence that there was a critical eye being cast on any of this. The UNDP has programs. Those programs, although they are conventions and treaties, those programs are given the same sort of resources by the agency as any convention and as any treaty would be. With UNESCO, it's a much more simple matter. There are all the cultural conventions. Each has its own secretariat. In the same way, each UNDP program has its own secretariat. Each FAO program has its own secretariat. FAO does have treaties and agreements. For example, the Treaty on Plant Genetic Material. So those become, let us say, individual departments in the supranational ministry, because it has to be treated as such. And those are mammoth departments. Mammoth not in terms of the number of people, but in terms of the reach. And what is the reach? The reach is to every single country and territory which has ratified these or acceded to these. So there are all these terminologies that I had to become familiar with. I had no idea what they meant. What is the difference between ratification and accession? Well, it has to do with this and it has to do with that. And this was when I began to do this work on FAO, especially in the area of the agricultural heritage sites. Every single treaty, convention, or multi-year program which has a dedicated secretariat for itself also has a dedicated pool of staff. This pool of staff is paid from what is called the usual budgetary provision of the UN agency. The usual budgetary provision is of a UN agency is supplied by its member states. So there is a recommended minimum, which I think generally each member state does try to follow. Many of them are, of course, in permanent areas on one or the other or several at a time. And that is the reason why technically the UN agencies like to say that they are always in a shortfall in terms of their members' contributions. Members mean the country contributions. So they may be technically correct, but this is only as far as the work budget is concerned. Then there is what we would immediately recognize as extra budgetary streams of income, or if we put it that way, I think it's more apt to call it revenue, revenue for the UN agencies. And this really comes from the much more, I think, important connections that exist between the upper echelons of UN agencies and the diplomatic corps of countries. So what that does is that creates programs which are meant to support a UN agency in its work through one of its treaties or one of its instruments, but which exists outside the usual budgetary framework. What this does then is that this immediately enlarges the money space for any agency. But the enlargement then becomes outside supervision. That means outside supervisable boundaries. What is supervisable is the work budget, and that is supervised at the annual, usually the annual committee meeting or the annual assembly meeting for that particular agency, or if the program is large enough or if the treaty is important enough, that particular assembly. And that is so far as the members' contributions, over which technically the members have a right to intervene and question and demand budget sheets and balance sheets and audits and so on. But what happens with the rest is that goes under extra budgetary contributions, special contributions. There are all sorts of fabulous names that are given to these things. For example, I mean, I used to, for some of my missions in Asia, I used to be paid out of something called the Japan-Funds-in-Trust, which was very simply a large lump of money that the government of Japan threw at UNESCO and said, please use it in ways that you like to use it. But when you use it, make sure that it is used in countries where we have a sizable diplomatic presence and in which we have also done work through our own aid agency, and that happened to be JICA, the Japan International Cooperation Agreement, I think it is. So all this came with strings attached, silken strings, but strings nonetheless. And the reason they did that is because, and of course I'm singling out Japan because I think on maybe four of these missions that probably all of them were in Southeast Asia. I got paid as an expert on intangible cultural heritage, not by UNESCO directly, not by UNESCO headquarters or by UNESCO Bangkok, but because of money from the Japan Funds in Trust. So what I'm trying to show you by this is that Japan in this case, through the Funds in Trust for this particular agency, it would have Funds in Trust for other agencies which engage people like me in other sectors in other countries. What then happens is that this becomes effectively a hidden arrangement. The Secretariat of a convention or a treaty will report it at the annual meeting, but it's a report. It's not a statement of objectives at the start of a program year or at the start of a program cycle, which in the UN system is 2 years. So a secretarial administrator does not go up and say that, look, we are expecting this money to come from such and such country. We're going to call it this, and we would like to deploy this money in so and so country to work on Convention A or B or C or Treaty A or B or C. No, what they will do instead is they will first, I think this is something that I've pondered over long enough, because very often I came across situations in these countries which simply didn't make sense to me. And what didn't make sense to me is the presence of certain people who had nothing to do with what we were doing from the countries that were actually donating that money. Why is this Japanese man who builds railway lines, why is he sitting here? That fellow there from this that new multilateral development banks that set up in Shanghai, who are busy actually giving money for garment processing factories, what's he doing here? You know, things like that, electrical power transmission and so on. So these were obviously signs to the backroom operations or the backroom deals that existed between UN agencies and what UN agencies love to call donor countries. Of course, the donations are all given the cloak and the garb of humanitarian assistance or relief, or where the donor agency, you know, as I said, then becomes the hidden director of where the money is to be deployed. By where I mean not for a particular program. They are not interested in the program. They are interested in the effect that the use of the money for that program has on their continuing presence in that country as a vector of a particular kind of development that they are interested in seeing happen in that country. Extravagant lifestyles. Thanks to this organization at that time, which was called International Rivers, there was a chap called Patrick McCurry, who then wrote a book about the whole big dams nonsense. The word that, or the info that we got out of those activists was that the World Bank gobbled up something like nearly 70% of their budget on themselves. Their annual budget was to sustain themselves. And this was, it was unimaginable to us that you are supposed to be the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which is your official title. What reconstruction and development can you do with $3 out of $10? Anyway, but I suppose the UN agencies have brazenly internalized this whole contradiction and gone about their work thereafter. And not only that, they have actually enlarged it, because what does happen, in fact, your point about accountability, what is told even to the representatives of the member states is what is spent from a particular source and tranche of funds from that source, not what is collected or not what is agreed upon and is yet to be collected. So we don't know whatsoever. So they may talk about a additional budget or an extra work budget, etc., from which certain activities are funded, but the corpus of that budget we don't know. Do you know that the CAG, our CAG, audits WHO accounts? So CAG's counterparts in other countries, which have a certain level of expertise and technical competence, who can do this, they do this for other UN agencies as well. So far as I know, CAG has audited WHO for 2 cycles, and on both, they have raised major issues. Where did this money come from? You said you would spend it here, you didn't spend it here, and so on and so on. Massive issues. If you look at them as in, and if you go to WHO, anybody, UNFPA, whoever it is, and say, please describe to us the ways in which you have self-corrective, self-remedial measures and internal processes. They'll say, yes, of course, we have this, that, and the other. Like I was telling you about the invisible UN units which do the internal oversight. So that there are 2 parts to that. One is program oversight and one is financial oversight. So they do have that, but it's not public. Even the internal oversight that I have, surveys that I have contributed to, are not public. So they and this is the there are it's like one of those halls of mirrors. There are levels of veils that you don't even know exist. So member states often don't know that a internal oversight report has been produced until they ask for it. So it's not a private corporation, nor is the auditing firm a private corporation. So I wish there was at some point I had been able to gain entry into one of these general assemblies, but being a mundane and lowly sort of oriental figure in some backwater third world place, I never made the grade. But thanks to some higher ups, I did get some idea of how it actually works. And really what I heard, at first it completely confused me, but then when I sat and thought about it and thought about what I had experienced and who I had seen in those countries doing what, then it began to sort of make sense in a peculiar way.